Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Yeah. Terrific. I'm Alex Moss. I'm Associate Dean of Academic Affairs here at UC Berkeley. I'm here on behalf of our interim dean, Jenny Chapman, who is traveling today. And I'd like to welcome you to our kickoff for the Dean Speaker Series this year. And it is my great pleasure to introduce today's guest, Jill Evanko, CEO of Chart Industries. Welcome. Chart is a global leader in manufacturing highly engineered equipment for clean energy and industrial gas markets. And as I've been learning, the range of activities that their equipment supports is just vast. They supply, among others, hospitals for oxygen, SpaceX. They support our cryogen operation here at UC Berkeley in physics and chemistry, which is vital for research. If you've ever had a refreshing nitro beer, you can thank Chart's frost-free, vacuum-insulated liquid nitrogen equipment for making that possible. That's a mouthful, but thank you for that. And on a larger scale, their LNG systems have been an energy security linchpin in these tumultuous economic times. Jill has been at the helm of Chart since 2018. And she has skillfully navigated this complex macroeconomic environment with great success, delivering strong and sustained financial performance. Under her leadership, the company has maintained an unwavering dedication to clean energy and sustainability, joining the UN Global Compact, a voluntary initiative to implement sustainability principles, and initiating strategic acquisitions that have allowed Chart to expand its offering of products across what Jill calls the nexus of clean. Jill manages a almost 12,000 employee workforce around the entire globe with a commitment to diversity and inclusion. Before joining Chart, Jill held multiple financial and operational executive roles in industrial manufacturing and engineering. I'm sure we'll talk more about that. And she has won numerous awards for her leadership, including the ExxonMobil Power Play Rainmaker Award and the S&P Global Platts Energy Award for Chief Trailblazer, just to name a few. She serves on multiple boards, and I have been learning that she finds significant amount of time to mentor future leaders. And I did get her permission to say this because I couldn't believe it, but she actually answers every email and LinkedIn request that comes her way, and views that as a mentorship opportunity. So that's amazing. So we're honored to have the opportunity to learn from someone who is making a difference every day. And I will now turn it over to our moderators, Olivia Haas-Diaz and Ashley Wong, who will moderate today's discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. We're really excited to be here today. My name's Olivia Haas-Diaz. I'm a second-year dual MBA and MPH, so Masters of Public Health student. Really excited to be here.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ashley, also a second-year MBA student at Haas. Thank you so much for joining us here today, Jill, as well as bringing a few members of your A team. We're really excited to get to know a little bit more about you as a leader and your work at Chart today.
Well, thank you guys for having me. It's wonderful to be here. It's always awkward to hear your biography being read, but I would love to also reiterate the message that if you don't get the chance to talk to us today, make sure you reach out, because we love hearing from folks that are looking for opportunities in the future of engineering. So looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks, Jill. And Ashley and I have her contact info if you need it. So we'd like to start off by talking a bit about your career journey. You have a very diverse professional journey, starting your career at Arthur Andersen amidst the Enron scandal, then working for Honeywell and Sony before moving on to roles in the industrial sector. How did you eventually land in energy and engineering technologies at Chart?
Yeah, so just by a quick way of background, when I started out of undergrad at Arthur Andersen, I was not on the team that did Enron, so just to clarify. But it was an interesting time, and I think as many of you, either coming out of undergrad or out of grad school, you look at what is it that you want to do with your future. And one of the things that I have learned over my career is that it does not ever go according to the exact plan that you had at the outset. So you've got to be pretty adaptable to it, and that's really what's happened for me in my various different roles throughout my career. Basically what happened was Arthur Andersen ended up, we knew that there wasn't going to be an Arthur Andersen. And so I was going to be in the job market with 100,000 other people looking for a job in my early 20s. And so I took the job that came along, and that happened to be at Honeywell. And that was where I fell in love with industrial manufacturing. I started to get to know energy a little bit. And from there, I spent about 14 years at a company called Dover Corporation, where we did a ton of different energy applications, but also diversified industrial manufacturing. So one of the things that I love, and from Dover I came to Chart about 8 years ago, about the business itself is the culmination of engineering and manufacturing together. Because if you design something, somebody has to build it. The beauty of our company at Chart is that we design and we build it. And that's really fun when you start to see the world's need for more sustainable solutions, whether that's what we do in a step toward that way in LNG, but all the way to green hydrogen, which has been very active the last few years. We also serve water treatment, we serve carbon capture, utilization and storage, food and beverage, and multiple different industrial applications. But every single one of them, one of the parts of our strategy of the nexus of clean, so clean power, water, food, and industrials, is that we can help the world become greener. And that's embedded in what we do every single day in the design and manufacturing at our company. So through that journey, I've kind of done whatever the companies have asked me to do, but I've learned a ton. And I think it's really important that when you set out to think about your career, that you do say, I'm going to take on opportunities that maybe look different than what I originally thought it was going to look like. I can tell you, I started my college and I wanted to be a museum curator. So art history was my thing. And I quickly realized that there were there's like 100 museum curator jobs in the United States, so that wasn't going to be really great for me. And so I switched and went a different direction, and I fell in love with what I do today. And that's really important, is that you find something that you really enjoy, because you spend a lot of time doing it. And as through the introduction, two of my team members here, Jerry and Joe, stand up. Jerry's our Chief Human Resources Officer. So if you want, if you're interested in an intern, a job, anything like that, talk to Jerry. And Joe is our Chief Technical Officer, and Joe's been with the company for about 30 years. But these are two guys that are one of the reasons I love my job and I love the company, because they're really great people to work with, and they really understand what our vision is and what we're trying to do. Joe's a great example of career path being very different than what he set out for it to be. He was originally an engineer designing heat exchangers. And from there, I said, Joe, hey, I want you to run the water business. He said, sure. And then he said, Jill, I really hate the water business. And so I said, well, how about you go help me and sell something, run the commercial team. And so he brought all of our global commercial team together and created our first One Chart commercial group. And then about a year and a half ago, I said, hey, you have great skills technically, great skills commercially, business-oriented mindset. Will you be our CTO? And he said yes to that. So he's got one of those great journeys that says, it didn't start this way, but here's where I am. And he kind of has the best attitude toward it all along the way. And then maybe I'd just add two personal comments to this answer. I did my MBA at Notre Dame, which I'm somewhat appalled by their football performance this past weekend, unlike yours. But that was something I did while I was working, and I gained a lot of understanding from that, because I felt like some of the real-world experience that I had helped me take a lot more away from that experience set. And then most importantly, out of everything, and these guys will tell you, if not once a day, many times a day, you got to be kind. You're going to run into people again. That's why I always answer every LinkedIn, every text, every email, because you will run into each other somewhere along the lines again, right? So at the heart of the company, we want to profitably grow. We want to deliver unique solutions. But I never want any one of our team members or customers to walk away and say, Jill or Chart wasn't kind to the situation and the consideration of what we're doing. And I try to teach my daughter that every day. She just turned 11. She is a Swiftie, and so am I now. But we always say at the end of every day in our family, we say, were you kind? So you got to say yes to that, and if not, you're in trouble. Did you whine? No. And then we always ask, did you pee your pants, which started when she was little, but we've kept that tradition alive. So all that to say is, my career journey has been different than what I expected, but you've got to also weave in some personal elements to have a really fun and exciting career, because ultimately people matter.
Thanks, Jill. And it's always reassuring to hear that career journeys aren't linear. So appreciate that, and also reiterating the importance of being kind, because I know I want to work somewhere where I'm happy and I like the people I work with. So you've won numerous awards, some of which Alex listed in your introduction, including being recognized as one of the 25 most influential women in energy. What do these accolades mean to you? And is there one or a few accomplishments that stand out?
Yeah, so I would say 100% of the accolades that I've gotten are the result of my team. It's the money is in our company, and the awards and accomplishments are not made by me sitting here and telling you what to do or anything like that. It's really the people out there that are designing and building the product. What I really find impactful is when we as a company receive an award that says we've designed or innovated something new. So something that is what I would consider next generation or unique. And what that says that we're continuing to be on the market leading edge of technology. We're taking calculated risks and bets, so spending some money to do that, whether that's organically developing a product or an R&D project, or whether that's going out and saying, hey, we don't have the skills to do it, but we're going to invest in a company that does. So that to me is real impactful, because it means that we are moving the energy transition forward through our own technologies, which ultimately benefits business because you're going to be a market leader. And then the other ones that we love to see are sustainability awards. So we love to get the awards that say you guys are making an impact not only in your own operations, but also for your customers. And that's one thing that we're able to really tangibly measure and continue to progress on. And I point that out being in the most sustainable building here that I believe is in the United States or the world, but very cool building. And we love to try to make our operations less GHG emission impactful.
Innovation and impact definitely resonate with students here at Berkeley, and I think the broader community. So you spent your career in industries that are historically male-dominated, finance and industrials. How have you navigated this, and how has it influenced your current leadership style?
Yeah, so I get asked all the time, what's it like being a female CEO? And my answer is always, I just want to be the best CEO, not the best female CEO. And that's something that I've always kind of carried that with me throughout. And what I would say is that a lot of it is in your mindset and how you think about this question and how you think about the situation. I was 3 weeks ago, I was at the Raymond James Energy Conference, and that was held in Colorado. And there were 54 people there, CEOs, investors. I was the only female out of those 54. But what I can tell you is nobody blinked an eye, right? They respected the commentary. I had a seat at the table. It just so happened to be that in some of the spaces that we play, there's less female representation. But I think we can do a lot more to increase that. And so a lot of what we want to do is continue to open opportunities and roles and create the space for different ways to work and different ways to be a part of the organization. And that's something that we really try to do, whether that's being flexible for somebody who wants a certain type of role or has constraints as a mom. Working moms have different constraints than other people do, right? And so we try to adapt to that to be able to facilitate the future generations regardless of gender. But what I would also say is that I've literally rarely run across someone who thinks of me differently because of my gender in the workplace. The opposite is actually true. There's many times I get invited to things that our company would not typically be invited to because of the size of the company or a different scope or scale. And I may be being invited because I'm a female. and they need a female CEO. And I always say yes to those invitations because you get more business from them. You get to meet different people. And so, I say, even if you view that as, oh, I don't want to be invited because I'm the female being invited to this, go, because it's a great opportunity to show that you have the skills and you have the table stakes. And so don't turn an opportunity down because you want to view it as, it's a bias toward me. Can I tell a quick story? Okay. So when I became CEO June of 2018, the very first thing you have to do in the public company land is you've got to go out and talk to shareholders, existing shareholders, new shareholders. But existing ones, they hate a C-suite change. It makes them nervous, and it's like, who is this person, and what is she or he going to do differently than what the company has been doing? So I go out, and in the public company world, there's different ways you can go talk to shareholders. One of them is they have conferences, and you go to a meeting room, and you sit all day, and people come and talk to you. Very painful, by the way. I went to my first one. It was in New York City, and it was a room 3 times the size of this one with circular tables set up and various different companies like ours that were sitting there, and then investors were going to rotate between the tables. And so we were in between one of these 30-minute meetings, and I stood up and just kind of was standing by my table, and an older gentleman comes over and he says, would you please get me a coffee? And so I was like, well, I think the coffee's back there or whatever, kind of just whatever. And then he turns out he was my next meeting, and he was super apologetic. Like, he said, I'm so sorry, I didn't know what your role was and all of that, and I should not have asked you to get me a coffee. Anyway, he bought our shares. He's still a shareholder. And, there's always a good guilt buy out there. So, and I still see him every now and then, and I think he's just kind of like, okay. But how you handle something like that, right, is it's with grace. And, if he wasn't ill-intentioned in the least. So.
We always love a good story. I'll pass it to Ashley.
And Olivia and I forgot to mention this in our intros, but we're both also Swifties.
Yes.
Love it. Okay. We could have a whole different dialogue on this. I took my daughter to Wembley on her 11th birthday to see her. Yeah.
That's an incredible gift.
It was, yeah. I don't think there's, I think we should stop there, right?
Yeah,
she should not have another
that.
birthday. Yeah.
Well, as we dive into Chart Industries and its role in the energy sector, we'd like to help ground everyone in what Chart does, given its complexity. By a show of hands, who in the audience is currently in or aspiring to work in the energy sector? Great. So a few people who may already be familiar with Chart, but Chart is an industrial engineering technology company at heart and plays a significant role across many applications, from transforming energy for heating and transportation, nitrogen dosing for beverages, such as the nitro cold brews at Starbucks that we all know and love, cooling systems for medical products, supporting the transition to clean energy. I don't think that even covers a quarter of it. We'd love to hear in your own words how Chart's applications might show up in the day-to-day of individuals like us and businesses. Are there any applications you think would surprise us?
Absolutely. So it is a lot going on in our company, right? But engineering design is the heart of what we do. So engineers are at the heart of our 12,000 people. And then behind that, we manufacture what our engineers design. And what that allows is a customer to come to us and say, I either have this idea or I have this need, and we're able to design it or tweak the design and then build the mission critical pieces and parts for them. We have 64 manufacturing locations around the world, engineers at every one of them, and then we have engineering hubs in each of our main continents that we operate. In conjunction with that, we have about 50 service centers. So we think of ourselves as design all the way through to service and repair. And that's a really unique offering. But we also call ourselves molecule agnostic. So what that means is we can serve any molecule at low temperatures, high pressures. And these guys always make fun of me, Joe especially, right? Because I'm not an engineer by background, but sometimes I sleep at a Holiday Inn and pretend to be. So that's something that, as a leader in management in our company, we have a ton of engineers that have come through either engineering programs or general management programs, but the best leaders that we have in our company understand the technical side, and many of them want to also understand other aspects of management. So we encourage that as well. When you look at what we make and kind of what else do we serve, one of the reasons we're able to serve such a variety of different end markets is because our manufacturing capabilities don't have to change to serve them. And I'm going to answer your question about surprise end markets. But a lot of people say, we've never heard of Chart, right? I mean, even members of my family still don't know what Chart does. But when you talk about customers, you guys all have heard of SpaceX. You have all heard of Starbucks. You have all heard of Wendy's and McDonald's and Exxon. The list goes on in terms of the types of customers that we have. And then there's also customers that our customers serve with the molecule. So you heard about the cryogenic facility here, right? It's not only our equipment here, but also our customers that deliver that molecule to your R&D center. As well as customers like Carnival Cruise Lines, Viking Cruise Lines, that may buy a hydrogen ferry from us or a hydrogen ship, or they may have an LNG ship, but they're buying the LNG from one of our customers that we built a facility for in terms of LNG export. So those are kind of the types of things that we do. But what may surprise you is how we're able to take really old school designs and equipment into very new markets. Or up-and-coming markets. We've been doing hydrogen design and equipment build for 160 years. No one cared about it except NASA until May of 2020. And then everyone during COVID became more focused on sustainability, the future of the world, health, and all of that. And so then having 157 years of hydrogen experience gave us a great jumping off point to be able to serve these different end markets. Do you guys know what an air-cooled heat exchanger is? Okay, we got an air-cooled heat exchanger. Joe, you better know. Joe, describe what an air-cooled heat exchanger is and does without giving the end markets away.
Okay. Well, an air-cooled heat exchanger does exactly that. It exchanges heat between two different fluids. So inside of some coil or tubes, you have a fluid that runs through there. It has an enhanced surface on the outside, and then you have a large fan that blows air across those tubes, taking a hot fluid and cooling it down. Very similar to the radiator in your car, for instance. There you go.
Good job, Joe. Yeah, he's the head of engineering for us right there. But in ACHX, as we call it internally, right, this traditionally, way back when, really just served the oil field. And so you would see main installations of air coolers in oil field. So then an air cooler, okay, we manufacture this, and I can't tell you how many people we had tell us, like, well, what are you going to do with your air cooler business when the oil field declines? When as more sustainable solutions come into the energy transition, and we kind of shook our heads. Well, they're going to need air coolers too. So, Oxy's direct air capture project, that uses our equipment on that project. That's one great surprise, kind of direct air capture CCUS that uses air coolers. And then most recently, data centers. So everybody loves talking about AI, but it's really about energy intensity and heat rejection. And an air cooler is a perfect answer to that growing need on the data center side. Just a few months ago, we booked a large $40 million order with a data center provider, a hyperscaler, and we expect to see much more of that going forward. So a great example of kind of surprise end markets that you otherwise wouldn't expect. A couple other fun ones. So the doser. We talk about the doser. If you think about a plastic water bottle, it holds its shape because of the molecule that's in there. One of the things that we've worked with really large customers, food and bev guys that you guys would all know in terms of beverages, to cut down on the PET in the bottling. And that's a method that our doser provides. So we've been able to reduce I think the PET in bottling such as that by about 50% for our customers. And what they like about it is it still gives their customers the experience of the firmness of the bottle, because people like that bottle, they like that shape, and so they don't want to go away from that to like a paper container like a milk carton. So that's interesting. Well, that same doser is the doser we describe in for beer manufacturing, for making of various different bottlings of wine and Starbucks and so on. But it's also used by folks who are making eyelash growth serum. Okay. It's also used by folks that are making packaged liquid eggs. So very unique set of different end markets that, that the doser goes into. And probably the coolest part of the doser story is the doser has multiple different customers that use it today. Those same customers typically will buy a CO2 tank from us because they're doing food and beverage. Now those customers are buying small-scale carbon capture units because think of a craft brewery. And if you're making beer, you're needing CO2 and you're emitting CO2. Craft breweries have to go out to the market, to the open market, to actually buy CO2. And it's hard to find, you'd be surprised, especially in places like the UK and Australia and sometimes the US, and it's expensive. So we serve them with a small refrigerator-sized carbon capture unit that can be installed in a few days. The ROI on it is typically sub 2 years, and then they don't have to go out to market, and they're more sustainable because it's a closed-loop CO2 system that helps them brew their beer. Those same folks now are buying water treatment solutions because having a craft brewery, sometimes can smell. That's SDOX, so we treat their water. And that's really what we refer to as the nexus of clean, so the interlinkages between end markets that all require molecules.
As you mentioned, Chart is highly involved in hydrogen, a clean energy source, and liquefied natural gas, known as a transitional fossil fuel. We've seen the news recently that there have been renewed investments, especially in the Middle East and Asia, in natural gas, which indicates that perhaps the transition to clean energy isn't happening as quickly as we thought, or at the very least is looking differently across different countries. What role do you see hydrogen, LNG, Chart playing as countries aim for a lower carbon economy, but also must realistically meet its current energy needs cost effectively, especially in developing regions?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think the last part is actually a key part of the answer, which is around meeting growing energy demands. I mean, I live in Texas, and if the air conditioning goes out in July, I'm pretty unhappy, right? So I don't generally, if that happens, say, ooh, boy, I really want my air conditioning to go on, but I only want it to go on if it's from a completely renewable source. And so that's a lot of the mindset that exists in terms of the world. The other part of it goes to the cost effectiveness, right? So let me touch on maybe what I think the end game is, and then I'll come back to where we sit today and the reasons I think my view as the way I do. I believe that the world wants to progress this energy transition. I firmly believe that. I think we've seen both public and private sector take meaningful steps in moving this ahead, especially in the last 4 years. Like anything, it doesn't happen as quickly, I think, as many people want it to. And so you have this balance of continuing to meet the day-to-day demands while progressing down that path. And that's how we feel like we're helping by having various steps along that transition. You can choose step A, B, or go right to Z. But what we found is the folks who wanted to skip some of those steps in the middle and go right to, for example, wholly green hydrogen, realized that there's a lack of infrastructure in the world to support that the world, whether it's regional, global, or even just one location, typically is not going to rip out existing infrastructure to replace it with high cost of capital infrastructure. So getting that cost effectiveness down is a piece of it, but having the infrastructure is another important element. The other thing is, I would say in the United States, there's a very US-centric mindset. And that US-centric mindset tends to say everybody else, no matter where you are located or what your current energy support system or lack thereof is, should behave like the United States. And that is just not where some other countries and regions are on their progression. I mean, some of these folks are still building coal plants. And so taking a step toward natural gas or a step on the way on that transition is actually a positive. even though some folks would argue that it's still not clean. But thinking about it in that context, I think, is super important. We also see a lot on the linkage of lack of power or clean power and lack of water or clean water. So water or power nexus is super interesting outside of the Western world primarily. And we're starting to see some good investments being made in locations around both desal and clean water in connection with at least demonstration projects for moving to hydrogen. I think that we're well on the way of being pragmatic about that transition, whereas a few years ago we were far less pragmatic, and so there were lots of little pilot projects happening, but not a cohesive system. And for hydrogen to really become a larger percent of the total energy source in the future here, there has to be a few things that happen. There's no global certification standard. So we spend tens of millions of dollars every time we try to get a hydrogen piece of equipment certified in another country. And it can take 2 years. I mean, 2 years and tens of millions of dollars, there's not a lot of people that are going to want to do that, right? So we need to have the governments, the public folks that are working on schematics such as the IRA or the 45V or the EU Green Fund talk to each other so that we have global certification standards. And that's also with respect to safety. Safety in molecules is super important. The second is around that infrastructure. So right now, all you see really is these hub and spoke models. So very small infrastructures, not global infrastructures. And I think those get driven by it being easier to implement hydrogen around the world. And then lastly, unlike the price of oil or LNG or nat gas, there is no global pricing construct for hydrogen. And so if I sell it to you, it's what do you want to pay for it today? Where can I sell it to Jerry? How much is he going to pay? And so there's a finite resource that, that really requires a global construct to it.
Thank you. Actually, I think you tackled my next question, which was going to be in a time where Chart solutions are so intertwined with not only sustainability, but also energy security, access, and independence. What are the most pressing challenges and barriers you're facing? You mentioned infrastructure, policy, safety.
Yeah, some of the things I already mentioned, but I would also comment that this concept of private investment versus waiting on public sector is a huge theme that we see in our customer base. And that's not specific to any one country, but what you'll have is there's some capital that private companies are willing to put in, and we've done a lot of that ourselves, billions of dollars of investments into our company to either be cleaner ourselves or provide those solutions to our end customers. But at some point, we want them to also be spending the money. And so this theme right now that you see in the energy transition is waiting on clarification for rulemaking. And one of those is the IRA, the 45V, and the project funders are saying, well, if I don't have certainty that this rule exists like this for the next decades, then my project really doesn't make financial sense. So at the underpinning of all of this is funding, is certainty of how it's going to work in the future, and that's where the public sector comes into play, and that's where this uncertainty resides. But I've seen this happen, and I would say this is the first time, the last few years is the first time in all of my career that I have seen any energy source, molecule, call it what you will, have as much peer pressure as hydrogen has. And what I mean by that is, did you ever hear Microsoft or Google talking about LNG? No, you just didn't, right? UPS would buy a few trucks here or there on LNG, but it wasn't really a theme. Now, you talk to any company in the world, hydrogen will come up in some way, shape, or form as part of their potential strategy or their existing strategy and how that plays in. So that's a great thing, right? That's a great thing because you have companies that aren't directly related to energy thinking about how they can use energy to become cleaner.
I want to get back to something you mentioned earlier. You mentioned the closed loop system that some breweries could be using. So those seem to come from investments in wastewater treatment and carbon capture. So as we approach the next decade, what is Chart Industries, what are you prioritizing in terms of its commitment to your own and other companies' ESG goals?
Yeah, absolutely. ESG is so important, right? And I think this is an area that you see headlines on the internet or in the news both ways. You see it, where ESG was a huge investor theme a few years ago, and now it's not. And so it has to be ingrained in your culture. It has to be ingrained in who you are as a company. We do our diversity inclusion activities around the concept of making chart better. And that goes to a lot of different types of ways you can get involved. So if it's part of your fabric and your culture, then it doesn't matter if it's in favor, out of favor, or not. It's part of who our company is. It's part of our culture, and I think that's super important. And setting goals toward that. Listen, what you measure is what you achieve, and so I don't think that setting a goal that is aspirational is a bad thing. I think it's actually a great thing, and I think that's the way that you can get there and set a roadmap. One of the things that I really dislike is when companies set a goal that they don't actually have what the year-over-year plan is to get there, and so I highly recommend, and we do this, of what is that plan to actually achieve net zero carbon emissions by X date. How are we going to do that year over year? And we actually built it into our senior team's compensation. So it's part of our compensation every year to achieve a GHG emission target on a year over year basis off of the prior year's baseline, which also requires you then to actually figure out what your prior year baseline is. And this is a great thing for customers. It's also an important thing for suppliers. And you've got to really utilize the tools that are out there and the measuring and the measurements. And we really do look at what changes and why, because there's a lot of aspects that go into that.
Great. Well, thank you, Jill, so much for translating what can be highly complex, convoluted information into really great insights for us. Before we turn it back over to for audience Q&A, we'd like to ask a Dean's Speaker Series staple, which is, we're living in tense political, economic, environmental times, but also an era of accelerated growth, innovation, and scientific development. What keeps you up at night? What helps you keep going? And what are you most excited for?
Well, first of all, nice addition of eras in your question. That's a Taylor Swift reference. Oh boy, that list could go on for a while, so I'll try to keep it short, right? In my chair, there are a lot of things to think about and a lot of things to worry about. You're never going to be able to address things that are outside of your control. So what can we do ourselves to make the company resilient, to continue to be leaders in innovation? And that may mean taking risks. And you got to be calculated risks, right? But there are a lot of times that as a company, we've made decisions to take a calculated risk that would have been viewed in the macro environment at that moment in time as too risky or as something that no one else wanted to do. It was out of favor because interest rates are too high or uncertainty around geopolitics. But yet those types of decisions, again, they're not willy-nilly, right? They're calculated, but those types of decisions are super important to advantage your company, because if you're just doing it at the same time everyone else is, or you're doing it 6 months or a year behind them, that you're never going to be that industry-leading innovator. You're never going to be the company that people call to say, I want you to design my first of a kind. And some of the first of a kinds that we get called on to design are really, really stupid, but they're willing to pay, right? So that's part of what goes into our thesis of the future. But ultimately, to me, the number one worry that keeps me awake at night is keeping as many people as I can employed and adding jobs. And that's so important. So it really goes to making good strategic decisions. It goes to making hard decisions, and it goes to also making sure that you have the right people that want to be part of the company and have the right attitude toward their roles and toward the company and want to grow and want to contribute. And that's the best way that my team can help me keep as many people employed at Chart Industries.
Thank you, Jill.
Thank you so much, Jill, for your remarks. I hope you all found that as inspiring as I did. And I also want to give a shout out to Joe Belling, and CTO of Chart, and Jerry Vinci, who is the Chief Human Resource Officer of Chart, for being here. We're going to open it up for questions. If you have a question, you can just come line up at the mic. And I want to kick one off, which is kind of segueing from adding jobs. We at Berkeley are also, in a sense, in the manufacturing business. We're at the end of the supply chain for managerial talent and global leaders. And, I understand that Chart has open roles for people like our students. And I want to ask, what is it that you kind of look for in new managers and MBAs and students?
All right, I'll answer, and then I'll also call Jerry up since he's the HR guy. But no, we really look for people that have this ability to grow and the desire to do so. So you guys are all super amazing and very talented. You wouldn't be sitting here otherwise. That also creates a situation where you have natural built-in competition. And so we know that if you're talking to us, you have the table stakes that's required. What we look for is, what are those characteristics that we look for culturally in the business, and the desire to grow, and not necessarily have your exact career path set, but say, hey, I'm willing to take on challenges. And situational awareness is another thing we look for, very much so, because ours is a company that you've got to work across the company. It's not hierarchical, so influencing skills and various different types of characteristics that we would call qualitative. But ultimately, we have so many different paths and channels for folks like you that have great skills. You can choose to go into an engineering rotation program. That's kind of a path where you rotate to different various engineering responsibilities over the course of years. Or you can go into a general, what we call executive leadership program, so you have high impact projects across the business. Or you can go into a standard role. And what we like to do is also create opportunities. So even if we don't necessarily have a job that's open at this moment in time, but you say, hey, I really am interested in Chart Industries. I really want to come give it a shot. We'll make a role for you. And we do that regularly. I mean, we have a couple folks on my senior team, direct reports to me, that these were people that worked for customers and said, hey, I'd love to work for Chart. We didn't necessarily have a job, but we saw that they were talented, and we brought them in and created a role, and they've really flourished. So there's also an element of, if you have the desire to be here, we want you. Jerry, you want to add anything? Jerry says no, he doesn't want anything.
People that do well at Chart, they want more. They're flexible, they're adaptable. And they want to take things on. And we have programs that support that. Programs we specifically created for people that want to do more, regardless of what phase of your career you're in, whether you're at the beginning or in the middle. If you want to do more, we will accommodate that, and we love that. So flexibility, adaptability is really important at Chart, I would say.
First of all, thank you so much for being here with us today. I'm Gabriella, also second-year student here in the MBA. And your last answer was about what makes you up at night, and it's related to keeping the jobs. And I imagine it also has relationship with AI and all the technical jobs. I wanted just to hear more about your thoughts on how the AI is going to change the engineering field specifically.
Yeah, so the question being around AI, and I can tell you that I'm a firm believer that you can't replace people in their entirety. There's certain types of roles and certain types of data or information. But when you talk about the type of business that we operate in, the level of IP and patents and know-how that goes into what we design and what we do, we wouldn't want it to be in the ether. This is information that, in some cases, we're the only company in the world that can do it. And how that came about over the history of our 160 years is people. Now, within reason, what we would say is there are going to be robotics improvements, and we need to continue to evolve in that respect. A lot of our robotics automation improvements are actually on the shop floor versus in the engineering side because of that unique capability that's required for the type of engineering that we do. So we're always looking for more improvement, but I just don't think we can replace the core knowledge, know-how, and future of innovation with a machine.
Hi, I'm Puneet. I'm a first-year EW MBA. You spoke about data centers and how you're using the air-cooled in those areas. What I've also learned is data centers require a lot of energy, and two of the solutions that are being explored are nuclear plants, and then the other is building data centers around oil and gas. I mean, around shale. So can you enlighten us a little bit more about energy requirements and how are we going to fulfill those requirements?
Yeah, it's a really solid point. I mean, when everybody talk about AI and data centers, right? As this becomes more energy intensive, the larger you build, the more you build, and the more that the machine learns. So it's not, as you build the data center and its initial AI, as the machine learns more, energy intensity goes up. So there is actually a correlation even further from today on what is needed. And these data centers that are being built are really large. One of the debates happening with the hyperscalers is where to put them. And so historically, within reason, these were around water. So you could have water-based cooling, you could have different types of technologies, but now you're going into cooler temperatures. You have to think about the solution differently and also access to what's fueling themselves. So we're seeing more discussions around carbon capture associated with data centers. We're seeing more discussions around locating them in terms of traditional oil and gas locations. But most of the ones that we have seen so far, I was warned that all of this can be made public at any given point in time. What we've seen so far is actually more Pacific Northwest movement versus coming the opposite way down to the Gulf Coast, which would be the logical to the oil field. And I think a portion of that too is speed, where traditionally the oil field is a little bit slower to move to various different solutions outside of what they've known for many years. But it'll end up being a mixed bag, and there's also a thesis that at some point this extreme build is going to end. So there's various different views of it, whether it's 24 months or a little bit longer other than that. But the data center customers that we speak to regularly and that we know are looking for the ability to be modular, so build on, and in locations that have strong connectivity to the grid.
Hi, Lucas Davis, Haas faculty. So Haas Nobel laureate Oliver Williamson wrote about the boundaries of the firm and the make or buy decision. And I've been hearing echoes of this all day today. You've actually touched on this several times. But some of the toughest decisions that any business has to make is which opportunities to pursue and which opportunities not to pursue. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about how Chart thinks about those decisions, and in particular the opportunities maybe that you don't pursue and why you don't go down some of those roads. Thank you.
Yeah, that is at the heart and soul of our hour-by-hour living in our world is what do we do ourselves, what do we have someone else do, or where do we spend our time? A lot of where we are today comes from lessons learned, so it comes from doing it wrong or making mistakes. And and I'll set aside, you guys all know, right, there's IRRs and ROICs on investments and things like that, but really the heart and soul is where do you think a market is going to go, and are you the rightful owner of whatever technology or innovation is? And if I may take just a couple minutes to tell a couple stories. One, Joe, do you want to tell the liquid hydrogen pump story, or do you want me to? He wants me to. So classic case, right? I mean, listen, the heart of our company is engineers. So I love them, right? But on the other hand, you have to sometimes corral that positive energy and that tweakiness, because it's like you have something. Engineers love tweaking, and it's been a challenge for us because these projects can go long, or we have standard products that no one in engineering wants to actually be standard, right? Because they want to make everything bespoke. This story, my daughter was 3.5, so she's 11 now, and Joe's team, well, his now team, came to me and said, we need a liquid hydrogen pump. It has to pump at 1,000 bar PSI or higher, never to be heard of before, by the way. And we have to have it, and we need to do it. Okay, how long is it going to take? We'll have it done by Christmas. That was like mid-year. Christmas comes around, and there's a little toy pump on my desk, and it's like not, So I said, guys, when do you, Valentine's Day, Jill. Then it was Easter. And we went through the holidays for a year. And every Christmas then, my daughter would be, Mama, where's that pump thing, right? Like, where's that pump you guys keep talking about? And I let it go 5 years. We ended up not being able to build the damn thing. And we ended up selling the IP to somebody who was the more rightful owner. That was on me, right? There was a point there that I should have said, these resources are better utilized to go do something that's our expertise, that we're really good at. So we know now we're not a pump company. We're not going to be a pump company. We're not going to bring pumps in-house. We're going to buy pumps. And that has worked really well. Where that comes to be a rub sometimes is when pump companies then get bought by other companies and there's fewer pump companies, then you go, okay, well, my supply is now limited. And so you got to think then maybe a little bit differently about what that looks like. And so then we say, okay, we still don't want to be a pump manufacturer, but we need an exclusive arrangement with one of these suppliers or something like that. So that's one example. And then another would be, we did a minority investment in what everybody convinced me was next generation microwave plasma reaction technology to create hydrogen, and with the offshoot other piece being acetylene. Acetylene being used in vitamin manufacturing and nutrition and so on, has not returned anything to us, and nobody's using it, and vitamins are still being made. So, that was probably, again, maybe one step too far afield. So we've gotten much tighter in that new product development stage gate, and then also the circle, right? So you can't have engineers just on their own. You can't have ops on their own. You can't have commercial people on their own. You can't have finance people on their own. All of that ecosystem has to work together. And I'd say that's where we are in our evolution, is making that more seamless.
Hi, thanks so much. I'm Jenny Vaughn. I'm professional faculty here at Haas. I teach an undergrad and graduate course on managing business and human rights. I wanted to ask about how Chart Industries thinks about social sustainability in addition to environmental sustainability. How do you identify and then manage your impacts on people, whether those are employees or community members, and how do your customers think about that? Thank you.
It's a super important part of our business, and I don't think any piece of E, S, or G is more important than the other, but people are at the heart of the company. And so one of the things that's very important to us is that we think of, and I'll start with giving back to our communities. We call it our cool communities, cool being cryogenics, but we operate in interesting locations. So we're not in the middle of cities. We're in fairly rural locations where there's a lot of need in the community. And we think about that in terms of not only hiring, but also ensuring that our team members can give back to those communities. And that's not just the financial support. It's also, we give everybody an extra day off a year to volunteer at a charity of their choice. And that's something that we get a lot of traction from our team members, and they feel really good about that relationship that we build with the community, which in turn, it does benefit the company, right? So it's a give and take relationship in our communities. In terms of people within our organization, we have multiple different policies and procedures toward how we think about different metrics and approach to safety, as an example, being our #1 priority. But we also talk about mental health as part of safety. And that's something that is, I think, fairly unusual in what I'd call more traditional manufacturing environment, but it's very important. 7 days a week, I send a daily spotlight out to our whole organization, highlighting a team member or a group of our team members that have done something, something kind or something related to our key themes. Every Monday, we have Motivational Monday, which is put together by the teams around improving your health, making sure you have this balance with thinking about your mental health and taking the time you need with your families. So those are just a few examples. There's also very specific programs in certain regions, like we operate in South Africa, and there's a very different programmatic approach to how we are an employer in what is not considered a more high employer location for us. So we are extra conscious of giving back to those communities, and in turn, that allows us to develop more jobs in those locations. I could go on and on this topic because I think it's so important to the communities, but also to the future of the company, because you want people to want to work for a company that wants to do the right thing.
For one more question, so go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you, Joe. I'm Gary. I'm a second-year student at the Public Policy School, and I did some of research for the LNG or hydrogen. I find that the logic for the US and Europe for the hydrogen development is a little bit different. For example, Europe, they will have a RED or Renewable Energy Directive or a lot of regulations driven, but US here is much more like the business driven. So I wonder for the corporate side to thinking about these two, Europe side and the US business, and are there any different for the hydrogen development? Yeah, thank you.
Great question. Very different. So, and I would say a little bit of that is unfortunate, but I think over time it will become a little more integrated. And even within Europe, it's very different within countries. And so that's something that has created some challenges in terms of getting traction, because one country will move fast on hydrogen while another is still saying, I'm going to build small-scale LNG. And so that interconnection point is still lacking. But certainly the EU is more directive in public policy on the hydrogen front, yet that has not gained private traction. And so that's the rub in Europe in particular, but also there is a balance where in Europe there's a lack of discussion about the fact that there's still heavy reliance on LNG, and also on what that plan is to move from LNG or from sources of LNG to cleaner and greener. Europe faces, I would say, a different challenge technically on hydrogen. So Europe has to date been primarily gaseous hydrogen versus liquid, which is more in the United States. Gaseous hydrogen is cheaper technically, but also it's more difficult to fuel heavy-duty transport in longer distances that are comparable to diesel. And so we're looking for a sign or a signal that Europe is going to pick up on the liquid side. We're starting to see little bits of that on heavy duty, but still early days. And I think there's definitely waiting on directive socially in this topic. Whereas in the United States, it's been a lot of liquid. There's still gaseous applications. It's been very regionalized. You guys are in a state where hydrogen it's been a leader state for hydrogen, and that's come as a result of credit systems and the thinking ahead of what do we want this to look like. Now we need kind of the rest of the United States so that you can go from here to New York City and be able to make it in a hydrogen heavy-duty transport or whatever the vehicle is. But I think the United States is much more kind of driving that on the private sector. And where I think you'll see some uptick is marine. And the marine is funny because it was ammonia for the longest time, and now we're starting to see hydrogen become certainly a reasonable answer on the marine side. So your port here, Port of Galveston and Houston, I think you'll start to see some interconnection points on the marine side. But again, mostly liquid in the US, mostly gaseous in the EU to date.
I wish we could go on, but unfortunately we're out of time. Jill, Joe, Jerry, thank you. It's been invigorating. Appreciate your visit. I hope you enjoy the rest of your time at Berkeley. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Olivia and Ashley. Wonderful job.